Okay, I think we're starting with developmental issues and including codependency. I am in your hands. And what? And ego, of course. Let's not forget ego. It's almost irrelevant to most of us, but why not bring it up anyway?
How do we heal early psychological trauma, such as loss of a parent at an early age or childhood sexual abuse? In particular, could you discuss the interface between the psychological realm and the spiritual realm with respect to our healing?
Really a fascinating issue and very um, very complex in the way that each of us has to deal with it. Um, we're living in a culture that focuses on the psychological very, very strongly. And in that sense, we tend to see psychological problems as things that need to be given primary consideration before one can go on to spiritual work. In other traditions, for example, in Burma, where I study Vipassana meditation, the psychological issues are really treated as pretty irrelevant, and you just go ahead with the spiritual practice, and the psychological problems keep changing as your spiritual development progresses. What most of us have found in trying to integrate these extreme positions, which seem extreme to me, is that there is a kind of an interplay that it can often be sequential rather than simultaneous. That is, first of all, you've got to understand that all of your spiritual practices are selected and invested partly as a function of your psychological makeup. I mean, the people that are very attracted to gurus are often people that are looking for a good father figure. I mean, as an extreme example of that, you know, or people that are very compulsive go into systems that are very, very kind of tight and very anal. So that the psychogenic forces at work in which you choose your spiritual path. And when you follow a spiritual practice, there are points where you begin to realize that your psychological problems or neurosis or patterns or early developmental patterns are coming apparent to you, and they are coming to the surface so well that what you would like to do now is stop for a moment and attend to them because they seem ripe for plucking. A lot of people feel that they have psychological problems, but they're very deep in and they're not really ripe. And they go to therapy and they keep going and going and going and going, and not much happens because there's not a ripeness for letting go of it. Yesterday I was talking to one of us, and she said she worried a lot, just a tremendous amount all the time. And I thought back to the way that my Maharaji instructed me to deal with anger, and which was such an Eastern way of doing it that, I mean, we in the West would be appalled at this. He said, love everybody. Many of you know the story, so I'll just give the short version. He said, love everybody, and at another time he said, tell the truth. And I realized the truth was I didn't love everybody. So I either had to love everybody or tell the truth. So I decided, since usually I made believe I loved everybody, which wasn't true, I would shift gears and I would tell the truth. And the truth was I didn't like most of the people I was around. So I started to say, I don't like you, because that's my truth. And get away from me, you bore me, or you're very arrogant, and I kept pushing people away. And pretty soon I hated everybody I was around. I think Maharaji had something to do with it, because I don't remember such violent antipathy towards so many people. And there were, I think, 30 people with me, and I hated all of them by the end of it. And I was so, and he kept saying, love everybody. And then they'd call me from the back of the ashram, Ramdas, Maharaji wants to see you. And I'd go running up, and he'd say, Ramdas, I'd say, yes. He'd say, love everyone. I'd say, yes, Maharaji. And he'd say, Jao, go away. Then a little while later, Ramdas come up, and I'd come up, and he'd say, Ramdas, tell the truth. I'd say, yes, Maharaji. And he'd say, Jao, Jao, and I'd go. So I was struggling with this as best I could. And one day I was so angry at everybody, and I wasn't touching money in those days. So I usually had a bagman, somebody that carried my money. It's just kind of a superficial way of doing that trip. But he told me to give up money, so I just give up holding it. So it's a start. It's a start, believe me. So I walked to the temple because I couldn't get anybody to put money in the bus for me since I was so angry at everybody. And so by the time I got to the temple, which was 8 miles of walking, and everybody had been there for hours playing with Maharaji, and they were all eating when I got there, and I came over the hill and looked down at the temple, and I was furious. I hated them all because I had to walk, and I was, So I came in, and a fellow went and got me a plate of food, and he brought it to me, and I took it up, and I threw it in his face. And Maharaji was watching this from across the courtyard, and he said, Ramdas. So I went over, and he said, something troubling you? And I said, yes, I hate all these people. And I said, in fact, and it was bubbling up in me. I started to cry. I said, I hate all them, and I hate me. In fact, the only person I love is you. He said, you love me? I said, yes. And I was sobbing, and I said, but I hate all them. And he got milk, and he poured milk in me and hit my head and pulled my beard. And then he said, I told you to love everybody. Came up really close to me. And I said, yeah, but you told me to tell the truth. And then he came up really nose to nose, and he said, tell the truth and love everyone. And at that moment, an interesting thing, what I visualized or experienced was a coffin in front of me. And I saw that who I thought I was, which was somebody whose truth was that they didn't love everybody, was going to die. And that who I was going to emerge as was somebody whose truth was that I loved everybody. And he was just saying, let go, get on with it. And he said, you give up a little anger each day and I'll help you. Now, in Western psychological terms, you don't say to somebody, give up anger. You say, work it out, understand it, go to the source of it. He didn't say that. He said, let it go. So when the woman came in yesterday and she said she worried a lot, I said, well, there are 2 questions you got to, I really thought it through, and it seems like there's 2 questions. One of them is worrying functional? Is it going to get you where you want to go? First of all, does it help solve the situation? And second, does it get you enlightened? I mean, that's all part of the first question. Is it functional? Then, if it's not functional, do you want to get rid of it? And if you want to get rid of it and it's not functional, then the next thing is, every time it comes up, let it go. Now, that sounds absolutely off the wall psychologically. And what happens is you've got to get it very early. You've got to get it as it comes up, because once it's up, it has all kinds of secondary effects in terms of adrenaline, all kinds of stuff, and then it feeds upon itself. But you get it at the beginning, and you've got to have made the commitment, I really want to let go of that stuff. It's not getting me to God. I don't need it anymore. And then every time it comes up, you get it up. You get rid of it. We're going to talk later about judgment and appreciation, and that'll come up in that relationship. So when you ask how you deal with the effects of early experiences, what I see is, like, what I saw was that a lot of my friends who were meditation teachers, for example, they got just so far in meditation, they got very evolved, and then because they're Westerners, they began to feel the psychological problems that were coming to the surface, and they needed a fair witness. They needed somebody who was oriented towards that plane of reality to reflect back to them what was going on for them psychologically. And so a number of them, we talked about it, and they figured out an appropriate therapist for themselves. And these were people who were advanced spiritual teachers in the community. They went into therapy. Like about 5 years ago, I went into therapy for maybe 3-4 months. And it was as if there was stuff in me that was so ripe, and I so wanted to let it go, that as I brought it up, the person reflected back, and immediately it was cleared away. It wasn't the thing where we had to deal with the deeper dynamics of the struggle of my not wanting to let it go because it was so ripe. And then I got to the point where I saw that the deeper stuff was going to take a much longer time, and then I went back into my spiritual practices. And you can use the relationship between those things in a very, very powerful way, because the spiritual practice keeps coming. It's like in Vipassana meditation, which I really am trying to emphasize this week because it's such a simple and exquisite method of dealing with the mechanics of mind. It deals with mechanics, not content of mind. It deals with how you think, not what you think about. And because as it deals with that in that very impersonal way, it forces the content up to the surface. I used to go to my meditation masters, and I would be so full of stuff that would be so psychodynamically wonderful that I'd want to luxuriate in it and, look what came up about my Oedipal, and the teacher just wouldn't be sucked in. And that was, I could see my Western mind at work. So what I have been suggesting to people is this kind of intuitively listening. And you start a spiritual practice, and then at some point you may want to just go to that plane of reality. Now, what kind of well, we'll talk about what therapist, maybe that's another question. We'll deal with that later. In terms of early experiences, the really early experiences, the ones pre-6 months or up to about 15 months, are pretty much very, very primitive conceptual or non-conceptual emotional learning. They are learned in a way that they're very hard to get hold of. And it often is... and therapy has a really hard time and not a very good track record of getting rid of the basic structure on which the personality is built. It deals with everything after that very well, but not that kind of core stuff. And so I think that what one does in therapy, there are, of course, different kinds of therapies. There's historically oriented therapies like Freudian psychoanalytic therapy, which goes backward. And then there are existential type therapies, which deal with the present moment and what's going on. Like if you come into me and I'm a therapist, we can go back into what your relation with your mother and father was, or it's all being manifested in the way you and I are relating now. We can just deal with this situation. So we can deal with it existentially or historically. And you're having to make those choices when you seek out a therapist. Now, from somebody that is spiritually awakening, I guess I'll throw this in now. Ideally, you're looking for a therapist who is treating personality as relatively real, not absolutely real. This is really a very interesting point. Once in the West, we treat personality as real. We really think it's real. Who you think you are is real. I was battered as a child, and that seems very real because it's a strong mental structure in your head, and it permeates you, and you are carrying your history with you on your shoulders. And you see each person is presenting who they think they are. It's like they're putting out a huge mind net. This is who I am. This is who I am. This is who I am. And you can see it in the way they walk, talk, dress, present themselves, always presenting who they think they are, which has a historical thread all through it. And when you have started to awaken or see that there are other planes of reality that are equally valid to the one at which personality exists. See, at first you flip out into another plane, which you say you got high, and then you come back into this familiar, normal waking consciousness, as William James talks about it. After a while, you learn how to live more or less with more and more planes simultaneously, which is what freedom is about. It's not standing in any plane. It's not standing anywhere at all. Then what you would love is a therapist who has that same perspective, who has that multi-plane perspective all the time. And so, like when I'm working with somebody psychologically, and they bring their stuff to me, I hear their stuff. I was battered as a child. I was abused as a child. I hear all that. They're talking about a plane of reality. I want to talk with them within that plane and empathize with them and deal with them. At the same moment, I want my consciousness to stay spacious enough as an environment that were they ready to let that one go and recognize there's another plane of experience in which they live also, I'd be right there for them. Now, see, most therapists, because they think they're real, as a therapist, they think their patient is real. And they don't have, so that when the patient says, I've had this experience in which you and I are souls, or this is all an illusion, they say, well, that's defense. See? Because they themselves can't really handle these other planes of reality. Now, you can't expect that all therapists, I mean, if you're waiting for every therapist to be the Buddha, you don't get on with your therapy. So what you do is you use therapists in the same way, I've said it facetiously, and I don't mean it so facetiously, just because these are honorable professions, as sort of body and fender repair work. And you go to somebody to get your car fixed. You don't expect them to give you the greatest wisdom in the universe, but you expect them to clean it up. And you have to be able to use a therapist appropriately. And that's what a therapist is. They are a technician who's there to serve you about that plane of reality. And it's not reasonable to expect them to understand all the wisdom and be free. It's really an unfair expression. And when you start to attack them, it's called transference, negative transference. And they will be quick to point that out. And they're right. And they're right, okay. So, now, coming back to the question, the others will be shorter, so I won't. Coming back to the question of early experiences, I think that as you progress through life, there are moments when it's useful, either because of an environment or a therapist, or the nature of your dreams is showing you it's ripe, or there's something to look at the stuff historically. I think that to the extent that you keep looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, you tend to reinforce its reality. And I think from a spiritual point of view, the best game is to take a look, see what's ripe, and then go back into your spiritual practices. And very often, for a lot of psychological, I mean, the humorous image that I use in every lecture now, because it works so well, and you all know, but it's that prior to that in all the years that I was in psychoanalysis, that I was a professor of psychology, that I was a clinical psychologist, that I was a drug aficionado, that I was a yogi, that I had a guru, that I have done Buddhist meditation, I have not gotten rid of one neurosis yet. Not one. In all these 25 years. Not one. They're all there. The only difference is that before they were these huge monsters of, no, don't hit me again. They have now turned into these little schmoos that I invite in for tea. There's sexual perversity. Haven't seen you in weeks. Come on in, have tea. And and you get so that you're comfortable with your neurosis, and your neuroses become style. See, instead of neurosis, it's style. I'm an obsessive compulsive. What are you? It's more like that instead of I'm an obsessive compulsive. And you can feel you've dejuiced it. It gets dejuiced, and it's still there. Because if you wait for them all to be done, when you look at the great saints, they were all neurotic as could be. Absolutely. Some of them threw stones at everybody. Some of them, they were really off the wall. All of them. They all had very distinct personalities and all different. So you don't think your personality is going to disappear just because you evolve spiritually. It's just going to be less relevant. It's going to be less relevant or less interesting to you. So I think in the same way that in the West, we tend to elevate the personality so much that we take our early experiences and wear them like badges and marks and define ourselves in them. And I think that it is useful to look and see what you can let go of, but the rest of it just say, okay, it's my style, let me get on with it. So I was a battered child. I think that I'm finding less and less that I am focusing so much on personality stuff in people. I think people can let it go much more quickly than they can. Because when I meet a person now, their personality is much less interesting and relevant to me than it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And what I see now is a fellow soul just like me who happens to have their stuff and I have my stuff. And since I'm not looking at the stuff, I acknowledge it, it's there, but I look through the stuff, and as a result, we get to the point where they can let go if they're ready. And if they're not, that's fine. You don't have any right to take away another person's suffering. That's the best we'll do on that one. Question?
Do you see healing from deep childhood injury as a prelude to doing spiritual practice, or can that healing be practice in itself?
Any action in the universe can be something that is unconsciously part of the karmic web, in the sense that it is not awakening you in the fast sense. It is in the slow sense of working out your karma over, lifetimes. Or it can be an intentional act to awaken. It can be either one. And for example, when you help somebody, you can help them in a way where you don't awaken through the process. They got helped, but you didn't awaken in the process. And they didn't awaken in the process, but they got their belly filled if you give them food. Or you can give them food in a way that feeds their belly, and also both of you awaken in the process. So the same thing could have been done two ways. Right? Whether you can use your healing as an awakening process depends on the perspective from which you come at it. The minute you have a little space around the whole process, then the minute you have a little bit of the witness in you that notices your predicament and notices how you're working with the predicament, that noticer is developing strength to the extent that you keep practicing it in the situation. See, like if when you and I interview each other and our eyes meet and you're telling me a problem, the problem, and that's a healing process we're going through. The problem is real to you. Our eyes are here. That's another level of reality. Our eyes are a context in which the problem is being run off. To the extent that we keep them both going at the same time, the problem keeps getting re-perceived in terms of the other context. So you're just doing a contextual shift each time, which is allowing it to be spiritual growth at the same time as you're dealing with the problem. So somebody comes and says, I don't know whether to stay married or not, or whatever their issue is. And we're talking about the issue. At the same moment, we're putting it in a contextual framework which makes it both relevant and irrelevant. Okay, that's the way it's spiritually growing. It's spiritually growing to the extent that it shows you how you have been trapped in thinking you are somebody. Now, the interesting issue I've talked about before developmentally is that you really have to become somebody before you can become nobody. And it isn't an error that when you were born, you closed down into somebodyness. And then later you awaken out of the illusion of your separateness. That's all part of the necessary sequence of taking birth and learning a curriculum on this level. So that it If a child doesn't close down, they don't develop an ego structure that makes them functional on Earth. So it's necessary that that happen. The question is how they close down will determine, in part, how quickly they open later on. Okay? Because if they close down later and more conceptually, like at 6 years old rather than at 2 years old, it's easier for them to open later on. So that when you're around parents who are very open, who are not immediately trapping you into your container, because they're not trapped in their containers, it's much easier for you to open later on. Because you grew up in a context that made your doing it your work, not theirs. It's a very interesting issue.
Well, I joined this group because I also have developmental problems, and I feel that through loss of a parent, loss of a brother, that this has dominated my daily existence still, that for 20 years I've done psychological techniques, for 20 years I've worked spiritually, and I still feel like it's present every day, and sometimes I get real frustrated. I feel that your answers here have been based on what I would consider regular sadhana and spiritual advancement. I feel I have neither at the moment. And so I was aware that I was actually hurting inside listening to your answers because they sounded so right on, and I felt unable to, to be there, I guess. And I wondered if...
You've got to see that your reaction to my answers is coming from within the domain of I had that bad childhood and I'm struggling and I can't get out of that. That's a model in your head. Now the question is, how do you deal with that one? And once you heard that situation, then you start to do practices, even from there, knowing full well that first of all, you realize that probably the root cause, you've been dealing 20 years trying to get rid of it, and it hasn't a hell of a lot gone away, right? So probably that strategy isn't the optimum strategy to pursue. You can, for the next, you can be the ancient mariner with the albatross for the next 40 years, but it's probably not that interesting. It gets boring after a while, Let me tell you about my neurosis. So you start doing spiritual practices, knowing you're crippled and maimed and neurotic. I mean, I've got all kinds of weirdities, really I do. I mean, really, and some of you that know me well know them. And I mean, I'm really weird in a lot of ways. And I spent years being so preoccupied with my neurosis. And I even taught it. I mean, because I was a professor of clinical psychology at Harvard, I mean, I thought it was really real. And what has happened was when I got into the spiritual context, people didn't elevate it the way I had elevated it. And at first I felt they can't understand me. I can't really change. It's not going to work. And all I did was start to steep myself. If you sit and read the Gospel of Ramakrishna every night, and you read Ramana Maharshi, and you read Sri Aurobindo, and you read, and Miracle of Love, and you just keep, every day you read a little bit of it, and you sit quietly and just look at the scene, transformation occurs. And you start out from saying, it's not going to work, but I'll do it anyway, because what else am I going to do? I'll say, when you finish thinking you can beat it psychologically, why not try it? What else you got to do? I mean, it's either that or kill yourself, and what's the rush? You're going to die anyway. Might as well use your precious birth as well as you can. I hear your problem. I hear the pain. I hear what it's like to be so in a neurosis that there's no space yet. But I'd suggest to you that even in you, neurotic as you are, if you will look, it's the image I have, I don't know that I use this in the lecture. If you have did I do this, the picture frame of the cloud? If you have a picture frame and in it it's gray. It looks like somebody painted gray and then framed it. See, and that's because they put too small a frame on it. If you put a little larger frame on it, you see that one of the corners, there's a little thing in blue, and you say, oh, it's a cloud. Okay? Now, what you have is a strong mind, and you have a strong set of constructs about who you are and where it came from. And it's so solid, it fills the space. Your job is to find that little corner, which is the context-giving place. Like the person that just told me about the predicament isn't exactly the same person that's in the predicament. It's the person that's noticing the predicament. It's a tiny thread. It's 0.1%, while 99 and 9/10% is busy being the father of the child is the father of the man, all right? But 1% is just noticing it. Like when somebody comes in, they say, oh, God, I'm so depressed. I say, are you all depressed? Oh, I'm completely depressed. And we sit and look at each other. Is there any part of you that is not depressed? No, there's no part of me that isn't depressed. You're here with me. As you and I sit here, are you feeling depressed this moment? Yeah, I'm feeling depressed. Well, can you notice the depression? Yes. Tell me, is the noticer depressed? Well, no, the noticer isn't depressed. The noticer is just noticing. Aha! See? And you start with that tiny little thread of a part of you that heard exactly what I was saying. How would you have heard it if you were so in it? You wouldn't have heard it. You wouldn't be sitting here. It already fell apart. You see, you just won't die. Okay, that's the first round.
How do we create awareness that we are the creators of our own reality? And on a practical level as well.
How do we create awareness that we are the creators of our own reality? Well, the tricky one in that question is, which we are you talking about? See, how do we create awareness that we are the creators of our own reality? Which we does that mean?
I think that's more like, I can take that personally. How do I create awareness? Well,
See, because you, who is asking that question, isn't the creator of your reality.
Yeah.
You who is asking that question is the creation of your reality. You're the product. Your thinking mind and your desire to control your own reality is all product. That's all effect. That's not cause. The cause goes back, there's only one cause, and you're it. But it isn't who you think you are. So in a way, as you die more and more, you will end up being that which creates the reality. But who you think you are doesn't create the reality. Who you think you are would like to create the reality. And can maybe have the illusion that you're creating the reality. But you are yourself an illusion, a creation. I'm giving you the condensed form of this. That the problem is, and this is very interesting in the issue of healing, which we'll talk about later, is when you say somebody's responsible for their own cancer, which somebody is that? Because there are many somebodies in you. There is your psychological nature, that's somebody. That person is a lawful product of past learning and your biochemistry. And that's what's determining what you think and what you say and what you plan and all that. And there's no free will in that. That's all just happening. You're a happening. You're being had, in that sense. Then there is the soul. Now, the soul has, the personality is one of its products. It's using the personality and the body as part of its curriculum. But the soul exists because of karma too. So the soul is being had, but just on a subtler level. The only thing that isn't being had is God, or the One, which it turns out to be who you are. So you were free to begin with. But the minute you thought you were somebody, you're not. So who you think you are has no power. It's just an illusion. Well, okay, you tell me why it doesn't answer your question.
Because the thing that I'm most concerned about in traveling all over the place is that, how is it, you said yesterday that Gandhi created, what are his lessons? It's because my life is my lesson, or whatever it was that you said. What I'm concerned about is that we can go out and we can be ourselves or our non-selves or our non-somebodies, and that in itself is an example. But what are ways that we can help to spark this in society, because we do live in society, to help it generate?
The way you do it in terms of your effect on other people is you work on yourself to extricate yourself from the illusion of your own separateness, and then you do what you do in life. And as you do what you do in life, if you're a shoemaker, you make shoes. If you're a bus driver, you drive buses. If you're a mother, you raise your children. And whatever you're doing, that is the vehicle through which you express that. And it's like C.S. Lewis saying, you don't see the center because it's all center. That wherever you are is the center of the whole game, and it resonates out from there. And a fully conscious bus driver can affect everybody that's in the traffic around them, everybody that steps on their bus, everybody, their wife, their dog, their husband, whatever. And it goes out, and they in turn affect everybody, and it goes out in circles like that. Do you hear that? So the end up, you work on yourself as you're offering to all beings. Right? Yeah.
Next, the model of behavior that I use when I'm meditating, humility and surrender, and the model that I use in the world, aggressive sometimes, because sometimes it is dog eat dog, and I haven't been able to balance, or what's happened is that in the world I've been stepped on too much. And now I'm beginning to make some transitions which are real positive, and I'm making a fool of myself a lot of the time, but I'm much more aggressive. And I realize I've been using the spiritual model of humility, and partly just out of ignorance, not knowing when to do what, but also psychologically to hide from my reflection, whether I'm going to succeed or not in getting my desires filled. So I would like to have a model of, I've been thinking recently, what is it, a warrior, a spiritual warrior, or a heroic way of being in the world where I can keep my spirituality intact, but get my desires fulfilled. At any rate, it's very confusing, and I'm bouncing back.
What I hear is much too much identification in you. You're too much somebody. And you're ready now. The spiritual practices, remember I said the first thing you learn as a child is to become somebody. And then once you have become somebody, then you're ready for the next step, which is to come into the nobody specialness, which when you're fully in that, you can appreciate your uniqueness and manifest it impeccably. That's the sequence. Can you hear the sequence? You want it again? You start, a child, you can feel the children around here, the baby's becoming somebody. They really know, yes, I want this, there's somebody, they're becoming a real somebody. You become somebody, a separate entity fully, and you're at home, you're grounded, you're somebody, and you really, that's a lot of work to do that. And that may take most people their whole lives, but some people you get on with that. And then at some point you realize that you're trapped in your somebodyness, if that's all you got. And you've lost the unitive nature, and then you begin to awaken to the fact that that somebody is just a somebody. It's not who you are. It's just a vehicle. It's a roles. It's a set of roles. And you become nobody special. You start to, the awareness pulls back from the identification with all the somebodyness. During that time, and often that leaves you open to renunciate strategies, which is pushing away the somebodyness, which still leaves you stuck with it in the attachment sense. But whatever your technique, whether it's renunciate or tantra, when you have extricated yourself from your somebodyness, then that isn't the end product. The end product isn't to be nobody. The end product is, as Don Juan says, you huff and you puff. This is a hard line, really, of Don Juan's. You huff and you puff, and you make believe it matters even though you know that it doesn't. That you become an impeccable warrior. You come back into the form and delight in it and play with it, and you're impeccable in it because you're sitting nowhere. You're not sitting in your somebodyness. When you get into the marketplace and the marketplace demands assertiveness and strength and decision and saying no and all that, if you're busy being the somebody in the marketplace, you're going to feel you're cut off from your humility, your softness, your warmth. And when you're in the softness and warmth, if you're busy thinking you're soft and warm, you're beginning to feel at that point you're vulnerable and you're a pushover and you can't handle. If you're not any of those things, in this situation, that's appropriate response. In this situation, that's an appropriate response. All of the roles, all of the personality qualities are available to you, and each situation defines what's appropriate. See, a lot of people put down the chameleon quality of a conscious being because they see it as based on the need for love, because in them it is. That they become who another person needs them to be, or who the situation needs them to be, because they want so much to be loved by everybody. But that isn't the only reason you're that flexible. I don't really care who I am. Who you need me to be, I'll be to the extent I can be. What difference does it make to me? I'm not busy being somebody. To the extent I need to be somebody, then you and I meet like this. I need you to be this. No, I need to be this. So the interesting question is how deep your identifications are to your role, or how much you're fulfilling your role. Like you can meet a therapist who is, I'm a therapist. To the extent that their psychology is wrapped up in that identity, they are using their clients in order to fulfill their needs. And that treats the client as an object, and at that level, that prevents the client from changing. I mean, this is a bizarre sequence. To the extent that the therapist is a being who is being a therapist, they meet the client or patient as a being who's being a client, and whatever the dynamics of them are through the roles of therapist and client brings them more into their being, and they're just beings together, and they both get free through the process. That's the art of therapy, as I understand it. Right? And that's the same way with the art of life. For us to move from role to role flexibly, impeccably. So if I went to, I've told this story many times, there was a book, one of them, The Only Dance There Is. And it was published by a publisher, and then it turned out I didn't have anything to do with the publication of it. It was done by a transpersonal psychology journal. And so then I thought I should have a part in it since it was my book. And so I went to the publisher because they were going to renegotiate the contract to include me. And so I met this publisher, and he took a look at me, and he was a sweet guy, and I saw that he looked at me as I had a beard, and I was, as you know, this guy is a holy person, and I'm sure we can get a good contract out of this. And I said to him, Bill, I said, I suspect you and I are going to be really dear friends because I really like who you are. But I said, you and I are entering into contract negotiations now, and I just want you to know I'm going to screw you to the wall. Right? Because if I were any less than a hard negotiator, I would take on the karma of allowing him to exploit me, which would be on my head. Do you understand that? So that I have to be tough with you. I have to call people on stuff. I have to demand people are clean in their contractual negotiations. Otherwise, I am feeding that, I'm reinforcing their exploitive qualities, right? So in that sense, you end up being impeccable because you can't afford not to be. You don't want the karma of it, right? So you're not a squash in a business deal, but nor are you exploitive. Can you hear all those issues? Okay.